So we're continuing chapter 6 of Tanya. And in the beginning of this chapter, we talked about how Hashem believes in equality. That is the equal opportunity of the positive, holy forces in this world and the forces of negativity. And so we spent a great deal of time in the earlier chapters talking about the godly soul. And now we're discussing how the powers of the Sitra Achra, the other side, are opposite the godly soul. And just like the godly soul has 10 powers, the powers of intellect and emotion, and it has 3 garments, so too the vivifying soul, the soul that vivifies the body, the opposite soul, so to speak, has the 3 powers of intellect, the 7 powers of emotions, and they also have the 3 impure garments of thought, speech, and deed of impure types of behaviors. And now the Alter Rebbe will go on to define what exactly is the definition of the side of Klippa, to which a person is drawn by his animal soul. What exactly is the substance that this soul is made up of? And the gist of it is that anything that doesn't have a godly intent and doesn't bring any benefit to our service of God is associated to the side of Klippa, and it separates a person from God. They say when if you speak to a mountain climber, a professional mountain climber, one who's able to climb, very steep inclines, they'll tell you, if you're not always, taking your peg and putting it in the next thing higher and higher, eventually you're going to slip down. You can't go on cruise control in the middle of a mountain climb, right? And similarly, in life, everything's a binary. Either you're doing something that is positively affecting your relationship with God, or if you're not doing that, even if you're doing neutral things, but you're not intentionally doing them for the sake of God, then automatically you are slipping downwards, right? In other words, let's say somebody can go to the beach. Is going to the beach holy or unholy? Well, it depends on the environment. It depends on my intention, So you have to ask yourself, am I doing this as a godly act? Am I doing it as a way to, clear my mind? I don't know, you're going out for a walk at 6 a.m., hearing the waves crashing against the shore, and, it brings you to a certain serene place where you're able to meditate about God. Great. I know a guy, he goes on, he posts on social media, he goes on a God walk every morning. He's walking with God. That's his time to meditate, and that's beautiful, right? So is going to the beach a bad thing or a good thing? Well, it depends, right? Then there's people who can be going there, for, the visual temptations, right? That's obviously not a good thing. But the question is, what if you're not doing that outright, negative thing? Is it good or is it bad? Well, the answer is, if it's not good, then it's bad. So that's basically what we're saying here. And that's why it's so important for a person to infuse a godly intention, a godly purpose into every single thing that he or she does every day of their life. So even when you're eating lunch, you have to eat lunch with a godly purpose. You go to the bathroom for a godly purpose. Everything has to be infused with goodness and godliness, because if it isn't, the void gets filled with other things. So certainly when we're talking about doing something that's an actual, pursuit of temptation or negativity, certainly something like that will separate you from godliness. And in this chapter, and also chapters 7 and 8, the Alter Rebbe will spell out the different levels, the varying levels within the spectrum of Klippa and Sitra Achra, and how the animal soul operates to distract a person and separate a person from godliness just by injecting its negativity, its it's counter godliness into your everyday activities. So that's where the Alter Rebbe is holding. We're about a quarter of the page down. If you're on our website, jewisharcadia.com/7885, that is the entirety of chapter 6. So, Behein Haim, and these are Kol Hamasim Asher Naasim Tachas Hashemesh, all the actions that are done underneath the sun, which is basically to say all actions. Asher Hakol Hevel Ur'us Ruach, which are all vanity and evil spirit. So the thought, speech, and deed of the animal soul are called impure garments. As he says, Kol Hamasim, all the deeds. In other words, not only are prohibited actions and actual sins considered nothingness and evil spirit, but all things of human beings in this world, meaning eating, drinking, going to work every day, if they're not done for the sake of heaven and they don't have a specific godly intent, then they are not serving God. So if you're not serving God, what are you doing? Vanity. It's just evil spirit. If the spirit isn't proactively holy, then by default, it's evil. I don't know if default is the right word. Then it naturally fills itself with evil. It reminds me of when Joseph is thrown by his brothers into the pit. Right? He antagonizes his brothers. He's a little more self-righteous than them, and we can discuss who is right, who is wrong. But the point is that he was in a pit, and the Torah tells us the pit was empty. It had no water. The question becomes, Rashi asks, what do you mean? If it's empty, it has no water. Well, why emphasize that it doesn't have water? It doesn't have rocks. It doesn't have apple juice. I mean, yeah, it's empty. So Rashi says, no. It's empty of water. But what does it have? Snakes, scorpions, all those wonderful, great things that you would not like to hang around, right? And our sages teach us that this is really a lesson in life. That if the pit is empty, meaning if it doesn't have water, Torah is compared to water, right? If your head is empty and it doesn't have Torah in it, what happens? Snakes and scorpions automatically fill it. All sorts of negativity ends up coming into our heads, which, by the way, I think is also a pertinent lesson in today and tomorrow. You know, a lot of people face the elections with worry and concern, and all sorts of snakes and scorpions are creeping and crawling around their head. And we have to remember that the best antidote to all these worries is learning Torah. Because when we learn Torah, our heads are filled with positivity, with godliness, with good things. And the fact of the matter is that most of what happens in the elections or anything outside your own home doesn't really affect your own home directly. So certainly not in the immediate future. But anyways, that's just my own little tangent. We get back to Tanya. So what does evil spirit mean? So the Alter Rebbe quotes over here the Zohar, as it's written in Zohar of Parshas Beshalach. That's when the Jews are leaving Egypt. Shehein Teviru Derucha. Teviru Derucha means the breaking of the spirit. So the Zohar is explaining the previous line from Ecclesiastes, which said all the deeds that are done under the sun are evil spirit. The Zohar clarifies that all things that are done not for the service of God are the breaking of the spirit. And that's what it means in Ecclesiastes when it says nothingness and evil spirit. In other words, when we say spirit, it reminds me, there's lots of people who I've encountered, throughout life that have told me, I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual, right? Which I understand what they're trying to say, that I'm not religious in that I don't believe in the Torah, or, I'm not sure if I believe in God, might be agnostic, but I'm spiritual. But the truth is, let's understand what spirit actually means. When we say the word spirit or spirituality, we're talking about the spirit of holiness. And the word in Ecclesiastes, which is ru'us ruach, maybe it doesn't mean evil spirit. Ru'us means actually the breaking of the spirit. So when there's either the spirit, which is the spirit of holiness, or there is vanity and nothingness, which breaks the spirit of holiness, meaning it interrupts the flow of the spirit of holiness, which is drawn towards a person, right? In other words, what's keeping us alive? The spirit of God, right? The energy of God, right? And when a person detaches from that, when a person's distracted from godliness, they're interrupting that spirit from reaching them. And so when a person engages in their everyday life without any spiritual intent, then they're actually interrupting the flow of the spirit, of the energy of Hashem to reach them. Now the Rebbe continues, V'chein kol hadiburim v'chol hamachshavos, and the same is true with all speech, because we said earlier about action, but the same is true with speech and all thoughts that are not asher loy la Hashem hema, which are not for Hashem, v'lertzaynai v'lavadasai, and for His will and for His service. So although the Zohar refers to speech, it applies to, although the Zohar refers to action, it applies equally to speech and thought, that if they don't have a godly intent, even though there might not be any negative intent, they are nothingness and the breaking of the spirit. They're an interruption of the spirit. And therefore, they are a spiritual, an impure garment of the animal soul, which cause impurity, in other words, a separation of God from godliness to the soul that's enclosed in it. Shezeu perish lashon sitra achra. This is what it means when we refer to in Chassidus and in Kabbalistic sources sitra achra, which literally means the other side. Perish tzad acher. Sitra acher is in Aramaic. Tzad acher is in Hebrew. Tzad acher means other side. Which other side? She'enai tzad kedusha. It's the side that is not holiness. Now, this idea that anything that does not have a godly intent breaks the spirit of holiness is emphasized in the fact that the powers of evil and impurity are referred to in Kabbalistic sources as sitra achra, which is different than some of the other terms like evil or impurity or a shell and an interruption. All those other names are saying something negative. But the truth is, the term sitra achra doesn't say that it is inherently bad, right? You're on the other team, right? You voted for the other guy, right? Or the other guy, the gown. Doesn't imply that one is worse than the other. It's just there's two teams, right? Either you're for the Dodgers or you're for the Yankees. Like, well, what's the big deal, right? So sitra achra, in and of itself, other side, doesn't imply anything bad. But what it does teach us actually is that the primary problem with the side of bad, and yes, the truth is objectively, yes, in this case, it is something bad. But what makes it bad? Just the mere fact that it isn't holy. In other words, you don't need to do anything bad to be on the other side. But by not being holy, by not doing something for the sake of heaven, you're already in the other camp. Now, obviously, as I said earlier, the Alter Rebbe is going to go into great detail, and especially in chapter 7, about there's different kinds of levels, ranks in the other camp. But as the moment you depart from holiness, you're in the other camp. So, just like all actions of a person, which are not done for the sake of heaven, are sourced in the animal soul, and they're opposing, or they're the other camp from the camp of holiness. The same is true with everything in this world. All forms of life in the various worlds, anything that's not on the side of holiness is automatically the opposite of holiness. And from here we see that everything, every power in the world belongs to either one of these two camps, either to the side of holiness or the other side. And there's no UN peacekeeping troops in between. It's either here or it's there. And now the Rebbe says, "V'tzad kedusha einay ela hashra mikedushasei shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu." The side of holiness is nothing but the resting and the drawing down of the holiness of Hashem. So to understand why is it that anything that's not done for the sake of God, even if it's not something bad, is automatically the opposite, is automatically interrupting the spirit of holiness? So the Alter Rebbe is explaining the definition of what holiness is. Holiness means that you're drawing down a godly light. In other words, holiness is not just you're being detached and you're being an ascetic, separated from worldly matters, and you're attached to good holy things. But holiness means that you're manifesting, you're bringing down the light of God. So therefore, anything that doesn't draw in the light of God cannot be considered holy. Now, yeah, of course, you could eat a steak in a holy way by saying a bracha, by using that energy, the protein that's in there to nourish your body, to be able to do a mitzvah with greater energy. In that case, you're drawing down holiness. So then it is holy. But if you're just, blah, and you're not doing anything intentionally, and you're just going about your day, then at what point did you invite holiness into that experience? So, and Hashem is very exclusive of where He brings that light of holiness, that Shechina, into. Says ve'ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu shayra el al davar shabatel etzlo yisbarach. Hashem only rests in something that is nullified to Him. So, if kedusha means drawing down the holiness of Hashem, so a fundamental prerequisite is that those things that are eliciting that holiness have to be totally nullified to Hashem. Hashem could only rest in something that's committed and serving Hashem. Now, that's more than just accepting the yoke of heaven and doing what Hashem wants. True bittul, true subservience to God, is that a person feels none of his own personal ambitions and enjoyments and I don't know, I like vanilla more than chocolate, or anything personal of their own, but that everything is totally devoted to Hashem, and it's as if my own existence doesn't exist, and all I am is a vehicle to Hashem. And that's what it means when we say that Hashem only rests on something that is subservient to Him. So the bottom line is that yes, we can bring an element of godliness. Now we're not saying that it's a very high level, obviously, to achieve total self-effacement and not any sense of self. That's a very high level. But at least on some element to say, you know what, I'm not doing this for myself. I'm not walking on the beach because I enjoy it, but I'm walking on the beach because it connects me to God. I'm eating steak because it gives me energy for serving God. Now, is there a little mix of a personal ambition? Possibly, and that's something that we need to work on. But if we want to be in the camp of holiness, the only way to do that is by nullifying ourselves a little bit and bringing down godliness into our lives. We'll stop here, and we'll continue Mir Hashem next week.